We are selling FSF books and buttons and lapel pins out there. If you would like to buy them, please buy now. If you buy books, I'll sign them.
就是那个如果有买那个他的书 Free as in Freedom， 那个接下来演讲过后，他会亲自签书，帮各位签书这样。
Also, we have stickers. The stickers are gratis. Please take as many as you can put to good use.
就是那个还有一些那个就是贴纸，那这个贴纸是免费的，就是可以自己拿取，对对对。 那请尽量的拿啊，贴纸部分是赠送。So Richard, this is Blue Tea.
Hi.
He's the guy responsible for your presence here. Thank you for coming.
Hello， 大家，那个拿贴纸的话，大概就是赶快拿一拿，赶快就做了，因为我们有外国的讲者已经来了哈。对。Hello， 大家，看人陆陆续续进来，那想必大家应该都知道今天是来看什么的吧？那有没有人不知道今天来干嘛的？好，如果没有的话，那个就大概讲一下，今天的主题大概是就是Free Digital Society。现在的社会一直不断在进步，那每个人都脱离不了各种电子跟手持装置，还有你们的生活之中，甚至连电冰箱，它上面可能都有一个软体在运行，然后来便利你们的生活。对，那在现在电子跟数位化越来越普及的状况之下，有些事情也是各位也许必须要去多一层了解的。今天主要的讲者是Richard Stallman。那他是自由软体运动在30年前最早的创始者，因为有他，所以才开始了自由软体运动。 那自由软体运动，他们所造成的影响很多很多，在你们的生活之中都是影响非常大。从对，现场有没有人用那个苹果电脑的东西，什么 iPhone、Mac 或什么之类的，有吗 ？iPad。OK， 好。那有没有现场使用者用那个 gnu+linux 的 ？OK， 那个 Microsoft Windows 的？OK， 好。Okay, that's why you need to know.
Apple is worse.
Yeah. 对，那如果你们用 gnu+linux 的话，或者是 gnu 其他相关的工具的话，那你们一定要来，就是好好仔细听这个自由软体的教主今天的分享。如果你们是用 Apple 相关的东西的话，你们要知道 Mac OS X。它的核心事实上有很多的自由软体开发者去改进跟开发出来的。如果你们用 Microsoft Windows 的话，你们要知道，你们现在能够有 Windows 的软体更新，这些更新伺服器它上面其实跑的都是自由软体。对，全世界逃不离自由软体。对，那Richard Stallman 在2008年曾经来过台湾，然后上一次好像是2005还是2001年。那我自己是在2001年的时候见过他，10多年了，总算又有机会再见到他。那，那在今天的话，今天的这个过程有几件事情，可能稍微多一点资讯给各位，就是如果说你们有在用 gnu+PG 的那个数位签章的话，那你们可以到这个网址来登记，等一下会有机会来跟 Richard Stallman 交换你的 GPG key，sorry， 呀。那如果说你们在这整个演讲的过程中，有些想要分享或者是跟其他人互动的话，你们可以开这个网址。这个网址是一个 Web 版的 IRC 界面。那你们可以输入自己的昵称，还有这个 channel 的频道的名称，然后就可以开始与会场的其他人开始互动，这样子。对，那我是Blue T， 那我现在就是在一家叫做艺门的公司工作，那也是暨大现在的一个自由软体相关课程的一个讲师。对，那这一次 Richard 来的行程中，有另外一半一直陪着 Richard 的人叫做胡顺元，那也是我公司的同事跟老板。那之后有一些东西，大家如果不太了解，可以请胡顺元来帮各位翻译。对，好，那所以你要再稍微好，那接下来就是胡顺元在简单小小讲几句话之后，就换最重要的主角 Richard 上场。
谢谢。大家好，那就是很高兴也很荣幸有这个机会，就和大家介绍那个 Richard。那应该说刚刚 Blue T 讲的已经蛮多了，那我大概就只简单讲几个大家可能关于 Richard 可能需要知道的重点啊，就是他是在1983年在 MIT 工作的时候，就是说因为那个印表机的问题，他没办法去改 driver， 所以开始了所谓的那个 gnu 这个 project。那 gnu 基本上是要做一套整套的作业系统。那后来他在1985年的时候，就2年后，又这个系统的第一些软体出来了，要 release 的时候，他又弄了一个 license， 就是 GPL。那可能在场很多人知道，就是 GNU Public License。那是因为这个 license 的关系，后来才有了 Linux。OK， 所以就是等于是有了 gnu+linux 这套作业系统。那这 detail 可能 Richard 会再提到。那也是因为这样子，所以才会有各位今天的这个 Android 这些东西，还有 Linux 这些系统可以使用。那大概就是这个应该说，我们今天很多人在座的各位都受惠于 Richard 的那个1983年开始的这一场这个 Free Software 的 Movement。那我想就以热烈的掌声来欢迎 Richard M. Stallman。
Can I use this one? Does this work?
Okay.
Hello? Can we make this one work?
这个可以用那个手持的这个声音比较好。Oh, okay. It's better for for actually the.
It's convenient if I don't have to hold it, you see.
Okay.
If I use this, I have to hold it. If we can we make this work?
Okay, he said it's not working.
Oh.
This one, yeah. So.
Some requests for you. First, if you take a photo of me, please do not put it in Facebook or Instagram. That company is a monstrous surveillance engine. If you put someone's photo in Facebook, you give that company more opportunities to track and surveil that person. If the person is your friend, this is not a good way to treat your friend. But most of you don't know me. I'm not your friend, but still, please don't put photos of me in Facebook or Instagram. Second, if you make a recording of this talk and you want to distribute copies, please do so only in formats and with methods that are favorable to free software. For instance, use the OGG formats, OGG, or WebM. Please do not use MP anything. Especially do not use Flash. So this means don't put it in YouTube, because YouTube distributes MPEG-4 wrapped in Flash. And don't use QuickTime or Windows Media Player either. Also, please make sure people can download a copy of the file without running any non-free JavaScript software. So don't put it in YouTube. YouTube's HTML5 option requires running non-free JavaScript code. And please put on the file the Creative Commons No Derivatives license, because this is a presentation of a point of view. So, a free digital society. You will find many projects that say they want to make the world a better place by encouraging digital inclusion or closing the digital divide. That's what they say. They presume that participation in a digital society is a good thing. But that's not necessarily so. Being in the digital society can be good or bad depending on whether that digital society is just or unjust. Does it respect our freedom? If the digital society is unjust, what we should aim for is digital extraction, not digital inclusion. Extraction of all of us from the digital society, from an unjust digital society, is what we need. So I'm going to talk about 10 different threats to our freedom in the digital society. First, surveillance. Nowadays, we all are aware of how much digital surveillance is being done, thanks to a great hero, Edward Snowden. 3 cheers for Edward Snowden. Hip, hip, hooray. You were to join me? Hip, hip, hooray. Hip, hip, hooray. Hip, hip, hooray. Some surveillance is done by companies. Some surveillance is done directly by the state. But when companies collect data about people, they give it to the state. So really, these are 2 branches of the same dangerous surveillance. It's just a difference in detail, not a fundamental difference. Who is doing the surveillance? Sometimes the surveillance works through our own equipment, our own digital devices, especially when they are running non-free software. That is, software that the users don't control. Non-free software often spies on the user and sends data to some server. Examples include Microsoft Windows, the iThings, Flash Player, Angry Birds, the Amazon Swindle. That's Amazon's ebook reader. I call it the Swindle because that's what it does to people. It swindles them, and I'll explain more later. And nearly all portable phones. All these examples are non-free software that spies on the user. And there are many others that I don't know about specifically. Well, in that case, we can prevent our devices from spying on us if we make sure all the software is free. But there is also surveillance through systems that we use that don't belong to us. For instance, if you talk to the internet, you need an ISP. The computers in the ISP's office do surveillance of your internet activities. But those computers don't belong to you. So you can't control them. You can't stop them from spying on you and recording your contacts. A telephone talks to the phone company. The surveillance is done in the phone company. Surveillance of phone calls, and if it's a portable phone, surveillance of your physical location. But you can't stop the phone company from keeping these records just by saying there's got to be free software in the phone company, because those computers don't belong to you, and those copies of software don't belong to you. They belong to the phone company. If the users control that software, it's the phone company that will control that copy, not you. So the only way we can stop these systems from doing surveillance on us is through political organizing. We must make the government adopt laws forbidding surveillance. That's the only way to protect ourselves. Other systems that do surveillance on people, well, I've been told that in Taipei they plan to make train cards have a person's ID, which would turn that into a surveillance system. But the software that would do the surveillance would not be in the card. It would be in the machines that the cards talk to. And those machines belong to the train system. So we have to make the government tell the train system, no ID in the cards. And everyone in Taiwan should be fighting this fight right now. And then there are systems that exist purely for the sake of surveillance. That's all they do. For instance, in the United Kingdom, they have set up cameras by the side of the road to recognize license plates. And they have so many of these cameras that they can track every car wherever it goes. They track all car travel, and they make a database that records where the car has been in the past. And they can find any car in real time. If the result of this is total surveillance of where people go. And if face recognition gets better, they might do it to every place people go walking. What is so dangerous about surveillance? Well, first of all, if people know that they're being monitored, they have trouble thinking freely. They have trouble trying out their ideas. But above all, surveillance threatens democracy. Democracy means that the people together control the state. But in order to control the state's actions, we need to know what they are. States do things secretly. How can we control them? We need to find out about them. There is a famous question, who watches the watchman? Now we know, whistleblowers watch the watchman. For democracy, we need whistleblowers. But the state calls these whistleblowers criminals and mobilizes all of its resources to find and punish the whistleblowers. And that means the whistleblowers are going to be punished unless they have the courage and careful planning of a Snowden. And not very many people are like that. We need lots of whistleblowers, so we need to make it safe. We need to make sure the state can't find the whistleblowers, can't identify the whistleblowers. The United States recently imprisoned a whistleblower that they found by looking at the phone records of dozens of journalists. They got the phone records of basically all the relevant staff of the Associated Press. And then they looked at them and they said, did anybody in this agency call any of these journalists? And when they found somebody, they knew he was the whistleblower. If the government can do this, we won't have whistleblowers and we won't have democracy. Today, due to digital technology, we suffer from a level of surveillance much higher than in the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union was not famous for its democracy. And if we're not careful, we won't have any either. We have to reduce the level of general surveillance so that it's less than what the Soviet Union used to have, so that whistleblowers and journalists are safe and democracy is safe. Once the data is collected, it will be misused. Proposing to protect people from surveillance by limiting when the government can consult these databases will not work, because finding a criminal is always an excuse to consult the databases. So once they label the whistleblower as a criminal, they can look at the data to find the whistleblower. So these rules don't help. Therefore, we must redesign digital systems so that they do not collect the data. Let me give you a couple of examples. You know what a security camera is. It's a video camera, it's looking at a certain area, and it makes a recording. And if there's a crime, you can look at the recording and maybe you can see who committed the crime. But the recording is stored locally, and it would be too expensive to send people to collect these recordings all the time. So they only look when there's a special reason. If someone reports a crime over here, they look at the recording of this camera. The rest of the time, nobody looks. So this camera doesn't contribute to general surveillance. It only provides security. Now, if you connect this camera to the internet, it becomes possible for the state to look at it all the time and apply facial recognition and turn this into a system of oppression. This is the difference between a security camera and a surveillance camera. A surveillance camera can be monitored all the time, even by computers. Therefore, we need laws. Surveillance cameras must be forbidden. Only security cameras are legally permitted. That protects us from dangerous surveillance. What about license plate recognizing cameras? They are useful for a legitimate purpose. For instance, finding stolen cars, detecting cars that don't have valid licenses. But you can design the camera so it only recognizes the license plates that have a problem. So it could have a list of all valid license plates. If a license plate is not in the list, then it will be reported. And then it can have a second list of the cars that are reported stolen or which some court has given an order to search for. If the license plate is in that list, the system will set an alarm. But all the legal cars that are not specially being sought, they should be invisible. The system should not even see them. If we redesign digital systems so that they don't do massive surveillance, the government will not be able to oppress us in this method. Of course, if a dictatorship comes to power, it will change these systems. But it can't change them in the past. If we get rid of the systems of massive surveillance today, and they don't collect data, well, there's nothing a future government can do to collect the past data that it couldn't get. Whereas if the data is collected and there are rules stopping the government from looking at it, anytime the government changes those rules, the data is all there, and it can retroactively legalize looking at that data and doing anything at all. Now, it's not just whistleblowers who are persecuted with massive surveillance, it's also dissidents. The UK has already used its system of tracking car travel to attack protesters. Some protesters who were believed to be, well, they were believed to be driving to a protest. The forces of the state followed them through the cameras and arrested them on the highway and kept them prisoner until the protest was over, and then let them go with no charges. Clearly, this was simply an attack on democracy. We must not let them have the capability to attack democracy this way. We must require digital systems to be designed to be safe from surveillance uses. For more suggestions about how to do this, look at gnu.org/philosophy/surveillance-vs-democracy.html. Of course, to avoid being surveilled, you've got to avoid being stupid. If you give data about yourself to websites, you're letting them keep total records of you. You have to stand up for your freedom in the ways where you can. I don't identify myself to websites. I don't give them any information about me that they can make any sense of. They don't know it's me when I browse. I've never had a Facebook account. So don't be a used of Facebook. Don't let Facebook use you. The next threat to our freedom comes from censorship. Censorship is not new, but 15 or 20 years ago, we thought that the internet would make censorship too difficult. Then China proved it was possible to censor the internet. But internet censorship is not limited to obvious tyrannical governments such as China and Iran. Many countries censor the internet. Supposedly free countries censor the internet. Countries such as Finland. Finland set up a system of filters on the internet, mandatory filters, in 2006, I believe. In 2007, someone in Finland decided to do a journalistic study. He decided to try various sites and see if they were blocked, and then publish a list of the blocked sites. Well, they blocked his site. The government ordered all ISPs to block access to his server so that the people in Finland could not see what sites were being blocked to them. But it's only blocked in Finland. If you're not in Finland, you can access his site. The only people who are being prevented from seeing what sites are blocked in Finland are people in Finland. He went to court, and last year the Finnish Supreme Court ruled in favor of censoring him. So censorship of journalism is officially established law in Finland. I believe other nearby countries in Northern Europe have similar systems. Several years ago, the government of Turkey... this will be sort of convenient.
Okay. All right, try it.
Can you hear me? Okay. It's not very loud on this one. It's quieter than the other. But, okay. If it's loud enough for all of you, it's good enough for me. So, the government of Turkey told everyone in Turkey that they would have to choose between censorship and more censorship, and yet more censorship, and even more censorship. 4 different levels of censorship to choose from, but access to the real internet would no longer be allowed in Turkey. There were protests in the street. Bravo for Turks. But the government is still imposing censorship. A couple of months ago, the government of Turkey blocked access to Twitter because it was being used to spread reports of corruption in the Turkish government. Australia does not have filters. It has a different kind of censorship. Some sites are forbidden to link to in Australia. Electronic Frontiers Australia was ordered to delete a link to a foreign political website or be fined $11,000 a day. What was this website? It was not a terrorist site. No, it was something almost as bad. It was an anti-abortion rights website. But even though I find those views disgusting, I support their right to state their views, even in Australia. Because no matter how disgusting some views might be, censorship is worse. Respecting freedom of speech means respecting people's freedom to say things we disagree with. And there are countries with other kinds of censorship. In India, anything on the web that is judged to offend someone's religion can be deleted by the order of an official without even a trial. And they are very active at censorship in India. And this is not to mention all the countries such as Pakistan and so on that censor lots of kinds of material. Of course, Pakistan is a total tyranny. People can be executed in Pakistan for criticizing religion. It's one of the countries I will absolutely not go to. So, if we want intellectual freedom, if we want political freedom, we must reject censorship on the internet. Whether it's filters or banning links or deleting material, we must reject censorship. The next threat to our freedom comes from data formats that restrict the users. In some cases, the formats are secret, and they are handled only by a proprietary, that is, non-free program, whose purpose is to restrict users. And we call this digital restrictions mechanisms, that is, DRM, or digital handcuffs. Now, it's always a non-free program, because they want the format to be secret. If there were a free program that supported the format would not be secret. People could study the source code and understand the format. So of course, if their goal is to restrict people, they do it with a non-free program. Not only that, with a free program, the users control the program, they could remove the restrictions. So if the goal of the developers is to restrict people, They need power over people, and only a non-free program gives them power over the users. Examples, well, first, this is done in some applications to save the user's own data. For instance, I believe there's some popular accounting program that does this, and I think AutoCAD does this. When a company finds itself in a near monopoly position, then the executives say, well, wouldn't it be nice if nobody could ever compete with us again? So they come out with a new version that saves the user's data in a secret format, and as the users upgrade, their data gets converted into this secret format, and soon they couldn't possibly move their data to any other program. They're all captive. These secret formats are also used for distributing published works. And then the work can only be played by a proprietary program whose purpose is to restrict people. Examples of such software include Microsoft Windows, Mac OS, the iThings, Flash Player, the Amazon Swindle. All of these programs are malware. Malware means a program designed to hurt the users. Now, in some cases, the malware is a virus and it was not supposed to be in the computer at all. In other cases, the malware is an operating system, or it's the firmware of the device. And yes, it's supposed to be in the device, but it's still malware because it's designed to mistreat the users. And I've told you about two kinds of mistreatment. There's spying, and there are digital handcuffs. There are also formats that hurt the users because they are patented. And this means that they're not secret. For instance, the MP formats. They're not secret. They're published specifications, but they're patented, and so many free software distributors are scared to include the free software to handle those formats. They're afraid that they will get sued. So they distribute gnu+linux systems either with no support for playing an MP3 file, or they have proprietary software for playing an MP3 file. Both of these are bad. If they have no software to play MP3, the users install this and they say, well, this system is no good, it can't play my MP3 files. If they distribute non-free software to play MP3 files, the user's freedom is trampled by that non-free software. So this problem is one side of the vice. The other side of the vice is, look at all the MP3 files out there, and all the MPEG-4 files and MPEG-2 files out there. And the fact that people are distributing those puts pressure on people to want to use them. And what's in the middle being squeezed is freedom. This is why I say don't distribute my talks in those formats. Because this is my opportunity to say distribute things in a way that doesn't hurt our community. Of course, you really should do that all the time. I never agree to make an MP3 file or an MPEG file because I want things to be done right. You can insist on doing things right also. And then there's the special case of Flash. Flash has a system of digital restrictions mechanism, but it's not used much, and if we ignore that, it's not secret and it's not patented. But it restricts the users because Adobe has changed the format so many times that we have been unable to catch up. We have support for Flash version 8. And Flash is on version 13 or something. Now, what does it mean to have a new version of Flash? It sounds like they changed it a little. No, Flash version 9 was completely redesigned. It's a totally different format. We have to start from zero. So, don't put Flash in a website. At all, ever. Well, this is just water. Anyway, the next threat to our freedom comes from software that the users don't control, non-free software. With software, there are two possibilities. Either the users control the program or the program controls the users. It's always one or the other. When the users control the program, we call that free software. Free as in freedom. So it's 自由. And the point is, in order for the users to have control over the program, the users need the 4 essential freedoms. Freedom 0 is the freedom to run the program as you wish for whatever purpose. Freedom 1 is the freedom to study the program's source code and change it so the program does your computing the way you wish. With these two freedoms, each user separately has control over this program. But separate control is not enough. First of all, because most users are not programmers. Most people and most organizations don't know how to study and change source code. So separate control doesn't help them directly. The users also need collective control. No, don't take it away. What's wrong?
Okay, let's go.
It's water. It's fine. It doesn't have caffeine, but it's still good. So we need collective control, which means that any group of users are free to work together to exercise control over what the program does for them. This requires 2 more essential freedoms. Freedom 2 is the freedom to make and distribute exact copies of the program. Freedom 3 is the freedom to make copies of your modified versions and distribute them. With these 2 freedoms, the people in the group are free to work together to make the program function for them the way they wish, and also free to distribute copies of that to the public. So, with all these 4 freedoms, the users control the program, which is the way it should be. But if one of these freedoms is missing or insufficient, the users do not fully control the program, which means the program controls the users, and the owner controls the program. So this program is an instrument of the developer or owner's power over the users. That's why it's an injustice. Every non-free program is an injustice. Non-free software should not exist. And if you want freedom in your life, what you need to do to get it is kick the non-free software out of your life. If you use a non-free program, it puts you under somebody else's unjust power. Freedom means you escape. What is the consequence of this power? Nowadays, the developers are fully aware of how much power they have, and they are calculating constantly how far they can go in taking advantage of that power to gain advantage over the users and mistreat them. In fact, they probably start the company with a plan to mistreat the users through their program. So, I've told you already about 2 kinds of malicious functionality, spying and digital handcuffs. There are more. For instance, there are back doors. A back door means the program receives commands from somebody else, like the developer perhaps, telling it to do something to the user without asking the user's permission, usually without even telling the user. And what can these back doors do? Well, in the case of the Amazon swindle, the back door deletes books. If you make the mistake of using the Amazon swindle, Amazon can order it to delete any of the books at any time. We know this from observation. In 2009, Amazon remotely deleted thousands of copies of a particular book, an Orwellian act. And what was the book? It was 1984 by George Orwell. The book that gave us the slogan, "Big Brother is watching you." There was a lot of criticism, so Amazon promised it would never do this again unless ordered to do it by the state. If you have read 1984, and you should, then this promise is not very comforting, because 1984 presents a totalitarian state whose crimes begin with burning the books it doesn't like. But never mind, Amazon didn't keep the promise anyway. Sometimes the back door is universal. For instance, Microsoft Windows contains a universal backdoor. Microsoft has the power to forcibly change the software, which means that any malicious functionality not in Windows today could be imposed by force tomorrow. Thus, Windows is not just malware, it's universal malware. And the same is true of nearly all portable phones. They have a universal backdoor, which has been used to convert them into full-time listening devices that listen all the time and transmit the conversation they hear all the time. And you don't have to speak into the microphone to be listened to and transmitted, because it can hear you from across the room. And if you think you can get some privacy by switching it off, guess again. Because when you try to switch it off, it pretends to switch off, but it really keeps running and listening and transmitting. The only way to make it stop is to remove all the batteries. All the batteries. And that's not always easy. Maybe there's a big battery you can recognize, and there's another smaller hidden battery that's enough to keep it running for half an hour more. Some phones don't allow removing any of the batteries. I wonder why. What it comes down to is a portable phone is Stalin's dream. That's why I don't have one. There are some things that are so nasty that we must not accept them. And a portable tracking and surveillance device is one of them. No thanks. I will not carry something for the government to tell where I am all the time and listen to me whenever it wants to. And we know that the U.S. government listens to people through their portable phones. And there's another kind of malicious functionality: censorship. Mobile platforms from Apple and Microsoft are designed for censorship. They don't allow users to freely install whatever application software they want. They can only install programs approved by Apple or Microsoft. So that means that Apple and Microsoft are practicing censorship of applications. Now, I think this should be illegal. It's a foolish, it's a destructive practice, and there's no reason why governments should permit it. But governments are basically on the side of those companies, not our side. So what you see is, let me give you a list of the back doors I know of. There's a back door in Microsoft Windows. There's a back door in the iThings. There's a back door in the Amazon Swindle. And there's a back door in most portable phones. So, and there's there's a universal back door in Google Chrome for Windows. It's referred to as auto upgrade, but that's effectively a universal backdoor. So what you see is malicious functionalities are very common in proprietary software. Most people that use proprietary software are using one of these examples, at least. So most users of proprietary software are victims already of proprietary malware. Contrast that with free software. In free software, malicious functionalities are very rare. And the reason is we don't feel the same temptation. We know we don't have power over the users. If somebody does put something malicious into a free program, the users can spot it and then they can fix it. And it will be clear who introduced the malicious functionality, and that person's reputation will be destroyed. So that's not a very tempting prospect. The maliciousness is in the proprietary software because the developers have power over the users and they know it. So they feel temptation. We don't have power and we know it. So we don't feel the same temptation. Effectively, when the users control the program, the community of users can defend itself. The users of proprietary software are defenseless. They're helpless victims of the developers. I started the free software movement in 1983 when I announced the plan to develop the GNU operating system. I wanted to make it possible to use a computer and have freedom. And the way to do that, the way I found to do that was write an operating system. Then, as the author, I could make it free software legally, and then everybody would be able to use a computer in freedom by using my system. As an operating system developer, I had the skills to try to save people from the injustice of proprietary software. I could give people freedom by doing technical work in my own field. I was aware of the injustice of proprietary software, which most people did not recognize as an injustice. I had the skills necessary to save people from this injustice, and it looked like nobody would do it if not me. That meant I had been elected by circumstances to do this work. It was my duty. It's as if you see somebody drowning and you know how to swim and there's no one else around and it's not Bush. Then you have a moral duty to save this person. Well, perhaps that statement is too strong. Perhaps we could identify some other people, such as Bush's torturers, such as Obama, who protects Bush's torturers, and who knows how many other people, about whom we should not affirm that there is a moral duty to save them. Fortunately, I don't need to resolve these questions because I don't know how to swim. But in the real case in my life, the work to be done was not swimming, it was writing lots of code. And that I knew how to do. I decided to develop an operating system that would be entirely free software. Every piece would be free software. Because if there is one non-free piece in the system, that piece takes away your freedom. For the system as a whole to respect your freedom, every piece must respect your freedom. So I decided to do this. Then I decided to recruit others to help to finish it sooner. Then I decided to make it a Unix-like system as a technical choice. Unix was a proprietary operating system, in other words, unjust. We could not use Unix and have freedom. But I decided to design my system like Unix so it would have the same technical advantages and to make my system compatible with Unix so all the Unix users could easily switch. And then I gave my system a name, which is a joke. Because that's the hacker spirit. No matter how serious your project is, you can still have a joke as your name. The system's name is GNU, which is written GNU, and it's a recursive acronym which stands for GNU's Not Unix. GNU, GNU's Not Unix. Well, programmers love jokes based on recursion. But in order to be a joke, in order to be a play on words, it needs two meanings. The recursive acronym is one meaning. So why GNU instead of ANU, FNU, SNU, or UNU? Because those are not words. GNU is a word. It's the name of this animal that lives in Africa. So we have two meanings. It's a joke. But it's even better. The word GNU is the most humor-charged word in the English language, used in countless word plays, because according to the dictionary, the G is silent. According to the dictionary, it's pronounced new. So every time you want to write the word new, instead of spelling it N-E-W, you can write it G-N-U, and you've got a joke. Perhaps not a very good joke, but there are lots of them. So we have learned to associate this word with laughter, making it the ideal name for any programming project. However, when it's the name of our system, please do not follow the dictionary. Because if you say, I'm using the new operating system, you're mistaken. Because our system is not new anymore. We've been developing it since 1984 and using it since 1992, so it's not new anymore, but it still is GNU. So please pronounce the name with a hard G. Pronounce it GNU. There's another erroneous pronunciation you need to avoid, which sounds like Linux. Strange to say, millions of people, when they talk about the GNU system, they call it Linux, which is very unfortunate because they're giving all the credit to somebody else for our work. Here's how that mistake got started. In 1990, we had almost all of the initial system, but one major component was missing. That's the kernel. The kernel is the component of a system that allocates the machine's resources to all the other programs. So we started developing a kernel for GNU in 1990. I chose an advanced, elegant design, which I thought would make it faster to get the job done, but instead it took a long time. I don't know exactly why, because I didn't write the code. We hired somebody to work on this, but it took 6 years to get even a test version. Well, it's a shame. But fortunately, we didn't have to wait for that, because in 1992, Mr. Torvalds, who had written a proprietary kernel called Linux, freed it. In 1991, Linux was proprietary. In 92, he made it free. So at that point, Linux could fill the last gap in the GNU system. And the combination was a system that was basically GNU but also contained Linux. It was the GNU and Linux system. That's the name that fits. But the people who put Linux into this gap, they were so focused on this new component Linux that they perceived all the rest of the system as a minor add-on for Linux. And they started talking about the GNU system as a Linux system, which means they were giving the credit for our work to Mr. Torvalds, who started later and didn't do as much. Now that's not fair, so please give us equal mention. Please call the system GNU/Linux or GNU plus Linux. But there's a reason why this is important. After all, credit as such is not so important. It's a matter of ego. There's something more important than ego at stake here. Freedom. Because when people mistakenly think the system is Linux, they then think it was Mr. Torvalds who started it and that the whole system comes from Mr. Torvalds' ideas. And he doesn't agree with the free software movement. He doesn't believe you deserve freedom in your computing. He doesn't believe he deserves freedom in his computing. He says he's happy to use proprietary software as long as it's powerful and convenient and reliable. Well, he has a right to his views. But he doesn't have a right to use our work, to cite our work as if it were his work, as a platform to attack the philosophy that our work is based on. And that's exactly what happens when people call our work Linux. That means they're attributing it to him, and they mislead other people into attributing it to him, and that gives them a very tall platform to oppose our philosophy, which was the reason for doing this very work. And this is sad, because when people think that this was all, the whole system was started by Torvalds, and they admire him and they follow his philosophy and they refuse to even consider ours, then they don't learn that they deserve freedom, and they won't fight for their freedom. And that means we could all lose our freedom because not enough of us are fighting for it. You see, freedom needs to be defended or we can lose it. And that's just as true in computing as in all the other areas of life. So as we try to teach people about this issue of freedom, one of the obstacles is that people attribute our work to somebody who doesn't care about this freedom. But there's another obstacle. Many people, when they talk about our work, they don't talk about free or tsuyo software. They say open source. The purpose of the term open source was to cause our ideas to be forgotten. I know this because I know the people who came up with the term open source in 1998, and I know what they told me. Most of them disagreed with our ideas of freedom, and they wanted our ideas to be forgotten. They wanted to push freedom out of the public discussion. So they came up with this term open source that hadn't been used in computing before. And they defined it to be more or less equivalent to free software at the practical level. But they constructed a different discourse to talk about it. A discourse based solely on practical values. So where we say, if you're going to distribute a program, you must, as a matter of moral responsibility, respect the freedom of the users. You must allow them to change and redistribute the program. They say, if you're going to distribute a program, it's in your practical interest to let the users change and redistribute it because they'll improve the code quality. We cite values of freedom and community. They cite values of code quality. Our values are the most important point because our future, above all, depends on what we value. If we want to defend our freedom, we have to talk about freedom, because that's how we teach other people to value freedom and join us and help defend freedom. If we keep quiet about freedom, we are not teaching other people to demand freedom, and then it will be forgotten. Now, in practical terms, open source is almost equivalent to free software. The main difference in practice is this. Nowadays, there are some Android products, and the kernel used in Android is Linux, the same kernel used in the gnu+linux system. That's all there is in common. Aside from that, gnu/linux and Android, all they have in common is this one-piece Linux. Anyway, Linux is released under a particular free software license known as the GNU General Public License, which I wrote. And one of its requirements is they have to provide the source code. So the makers of Android products, they provide the source code at least for Linux, maybe not for the rest of Android, because they're not legally required to. But for Linux, they're legally required, and they do. But sometimes the hardware is designed so that if the user installs a modified version of Linux, the machine won't function at all. So what do we say about that case? Is that free software? Well, the source code's free. The source code is under the GNU General Public License. The users can change that and study it. But is the executable free? The users can't change it. Our conclusion is no, the executable is not free. But the open source people, they don't look at the user's freedom. They have a set of rules about the source code only. So they look at the same source code. It's under the GNU GPL. They say it's open source. They don't ask whether the executable is really free. They don't care. So this is where we and they disagree about this executable. We say it's not free. They say it's open source. So in practice, there is a difference, but the main difference is in philosophy. For more information, look at gnu.org/philosophy/open source misses the point.html. Now, remember how I said that in order for the system to respect your freedom, every piece of it must be free? Well, nowadays, there are over 1,000 different variants of the GNU/Linux system. They're called distributions or distros. And nearly all of them contain non-free software, because their developers are open source people, and they don't aim to make the system respect people's freedom. They don't talk about or think about freedom. So they don't see any reason not to enhance their system, as they put it, by adding some non-free programs to do some additional things. From the free software point of view, those non-free programs ruin it, because they mean you can't count on that system to give you freedom. But they don't care about freedom. They're open source people. So they add these non-free programs and they say, see, our distro can do these additional things. It's better. Because they have the wrong standard of judging what's better or worse. So you see, people's values do affect their actions. One of the reasons they put non-free programs in is to handle certain peripherals. There are peripherals that only work with non-free software. This is very urgent technical work. We need to develop free software to run those peripherals. In order to do that, we need to do reverse engineering. We need to find out the specs for those peripherals, and reverse engineering is basically the only way. So, if you want to make a technical contribution to our community, if you want to make an important technical contribution, do reverse engineering. This university should teach reverse engineering. It should have a projects class where groups of students work on reverse engineering of peripherals and try to make some progress and publish it. I hope that somebody can get that started. It's very important. It's also a very good career. So by all means, study this. You could make money this way. Meanwhile, schools of all levels and all educational activities ethically must teach exclusively free software. And this is not in order to save a little money, which maybe they can do. That's a nice secondary benefit. But I'm talking about something more important than that. This is not how to make education a little better. This is about how to do good education instead of bad education. You see, teaching people to use a proprietary program is bad education because it is implanting dependence on a particular party. That conflicts, that contradicts the social mission of the school, which is to educate good citizens of a strong, capable, independent, cooperating, and free society. So the school must teach exclusively free software in order to prepare good citizens of a free digital society. That is, people who are accustomed to using free software and ready to go on doing so. Why do some proprietary developers offer gratis or cheap copies of their non-free software to the schools? The same reason drug traffickers will offer the first dose gratis. They're trying to make people dependent. These developers want to use the schools to make people dependent. But that's a form of corruption for the school. Schools must no more teach a proprietary program than they should teach their students to use tobacco or heroin. But there's a deeper reason for the education of the best programmers. Some people are natural-born programmers. At the age of 10 to 13, they become fascinated with software. If they use a program, they want to know, how does this work? But when they ask the teacher if that program is proprietary, the teacher could only say, I'm sorry, we're not allowed to know how it works. It's a secret. And thus, education is not allowed. Every program embodies knowledge. If it's free, that knowledge is available to the students. If it's proprietary, that's knowledge withheld from the students. The proprietary program is the enemy of the spirit of education, so it must not be tolerated in a school. But if that program is free, the teacher can explain what he knows and then offer each of those kids a copy of the source code, saying, read it and you'll understand everything. And that's exactly what those kids want, so they'll read it, fascinated. And the teacher can tell them, if you come across a point in the code you can't figure out by yourself, show it to me and we'll figure it out together. Well, that gives these kids the chance to learn a vital lesson. That part of the code is badly written, so don't write code this way. This is an example of what not to do. How these kids need to develop from natural-born programmers into good programmers, which means they need to learn to write good, clear code. You learn that the hard way. You learn that by trying to read code which is not clear, and when you eventually figure it out, you say, boy, that's badly written, and then you learn not to write code that way. The way you learn to write good, clear code is by reading lots of code and writing lots of code. Only free software gives you the chance to read the code of large programs we really use. Then you have to write lots of code. You have to write code for large programs. But Large programs have special challenges, and to handle them, you need to start small, which means writing small changes in existing large programs. Then you can advance to writing bigger changes, and then big changes, and eventually you can change a large program starting from zero, which is the way you write a new large program. You change it starting from zero. Well, only free software gives you the chance to write changes in large programs we really use. So any school can offer students the chance to master the craft of programming, provided it's a free software school. But there's an even deeper reason. For moral education and citizenship, schools must teach the spirit of goodwill, the habit of helping others. Therefore, every class must have this rule. Students, if you bring software to class, you may not keep it for yourself. You must share copies with the rest of the class, including the source code in case someone wants to learn, because this class is a place where we share our knowledge. Therefore, it is not permitted to bring proprietary software to this class, except for practice in reverse engineering. The school, to set a good example, must follow its own rule. It must bring only free software to class and share copies, including source, with everyone in the class that wants them. And it must, except in the case of practice of reverse engineering. If you have a relationship with a school, if you are a student or a teacher or an employee or an administrator or a parent, it's your responsibility to campaign to pressure the school to move to free software. And an essential part of that is talking about these issues with other people connected with the school so as to recruit more people and build the strength of the movement. This university should stop teaching non-free software. That's got to be your goal. The next threats to our freedom in the digital society come from websites, more generally servers on the net that we would talk to. First, they may require running non-free software. Many websites send non-free programs to the user's browser. These programs are typically written in JavaScript language, and they're contained in the web pages. And if you visit that web page, the page silently installs the non-free program in your browser, and it runs, and you're not warned that you're about to run non-free software. The browsers just let it happen. Well, if you don't want to run non-free software, you need to block this. So we have developed the program Libre.js. Libre.js is an add-on for Firefox and its derivatives. It analyzes the JavaScript code to see if it's trivial or carries a free license explicitly. And in those cases, it's allowed to run. But if the code is non-trivial and non-free, then Libre.js blocks it. And it warns you, this page is trying to run non-free JavaScript code. Now, I should make one thing clear. A program written in JavaScript can be free or non-free, just like a program written in C or any other language. So some of these JavaScript programs are free software, and most of them are not. So Libre.js blocks the non-trivial programs that are non-free. It also blocks certain kinds of malware, because there is malicious JavaScript code in many websites, doing things like spying on people and identifying people. So Libre.js does one more useful thing. It searches heuristically through the pages of the site to find how to complain to the webmasters. And it shows you that. so you can complain very quickly and easily. Because the hardest part of complaining to the webmasters is figuring out how to send your complaint. They don't make it easy, but Libre.js makes it easy. So you can complain in just a minute. You see an email address, so you click on that, you type in, I couldn't use your site because it demanded running non-free JavaScript. Please fix it. Period. Send. See, that'll only take you a minute. You could send 10 complaints each day, and it would take you 10 minutes. You can afford that. And this is very important. How are we going to convince those webmasters to make their JavaScript free or make the site work without it? It's going to take lots of complaints. So start sending the complaints. The next threat from websites is misuse of personal information. Well, now we're aware of this because, well, thanks to Edward Snowden and other disclosures, we know now that websites are compiling tremendous databases about most users. Not me, because I don't identify myself to websites. They don't know. If I'm ever talking to those sites, they don't know it's me. They don't know it's the same person. I'm not using the same computer all the time to do it, and I'm never using my computer to do it. So they don't have data about me, but they have data about lots of people. And some of these websites do surveillance. Facebook does a lot of surveillance of network users, and not just the people who are users of Facebook. That is, the people who have Facebook accounts. Facebook does surveillance on other network users too. If you visit a page and the page has a like button, Facebook knows that your computer visited that page. It's part of the mechanism of displaying the like button. Well, this is disgusting, and our browser, IceCat, doesn't allow Facebook to do this kind of surveillance. It blocks Facebook from knowing that you visited a page. But in addition to the surveillance, websites ask for lots of personal data explicitly. And what are they going to do with that personal data? They're going to show it to Big Brother. So this is a danger of using those sites. And so I don't. I won't use sites that require people to identify themselves. No thanks. I don't pay over the internet. The only thing I ever paid for over the internet was to renew the domain name stallman.org. And there, since I proudly state on the site that it's mine, I don't mind identifying myself when I renew the domain name. Yes, that's my site. But other than that, when I buy things, I pay cash in a physical store. So no database knows who's buying. Occasionally, I ask a friend to buy something for me and I'll pay him back. Again, no record to connect it with me. So you've got to minimize, for your freedom's sake, the data that they have about you, that they get about you. Well, this threat we know of, but there's another that most people have never even thought about. And that is, if you let a website do your computing for you, you lose control over that computing. Now, I explained how the danger of proprietary software is that users don't have control over it. So if you do your computing by running a proprietary program, you lose control over how that computing is done and what computing it does. So you end up being harmed. You lost control over your own computing. Well, what happens if you let a server do that same computing for you? Then you don't control how that computing is done. The server owner controls how it does computing. how it does your computing. So you lose control of your computing. So these are two paths to the same bad result, losing control of your computing. If you do it by running a proprietary program, then you have a copy, but you don't control it. If you do it if you let a website do your computing for you, then you don't even have a copy, or sorry, more precisely, the copy of the program that's doing that computing is not yours. It's inside the server, and you can't see it or touch it. So either way, it gets to the same result. You lose control of your computing. So I've explained that non-free software is an injustice. Letting the website do your computing is the same injustice. The mechanism is different, but the result is the same. In fact, it's actually worse. I explained how many non-free programs spy on the user. Not all, but many. And thus they send data about what the user's doing to some server. Well, if you let a server do your computing, you have to send all the relevant data that you want it to compute on to the server, and then it has your data. So it's the same bad result. The server can abuse your personal data. But I also explained that many non-free programs have backdoors. Some have a universal backdoor that allows someone remotely to change the code and thus forcibly change how the user's computing is done without asking the user's permission. Well, if a website is doing your computing for you, the owner of the server at any time can install different software and change how the computing gets done without asking your permission. So, this practice is equivalent to running a non-free piece of malware which spies on the users and has a universal backdoor. We call this practice SAS, Service as a Software Substitute, which explains what's wrong with it. It's a service doing a job that you should do by running a program yourself. And you should run a free program yourself. And that way, you're in control of your own computing. That's the only way you can have control over your own computing, is if you do it with your copy of a free program. If you use a non-free program, you don't control that. And if you let somebody else's copy in somebody else's server do the job, you don't control that either. Note that this applies to computing activities that are yours. So here's a thought experiment to tell the difference between the activities that are yours and the ones that are not. Imagine if you could have as powerful a computer as you want, and that you could magically make free software of any sort you want. Could you do this computing inside your own computer? If the answer is yes, it's your computing. If the answer is no, then it's not your computing. It's some joint activity with other people. For instance, if you wanted to chat with me, you can't do that inside your computer, because how could I participate? You're going to have my computer communicating with your computer, and they'll have to work together for us to chat. So chatting is not your computing. It's also not my computing. It's joint activity for both of us. Well, neither of us is entitled to full control over a joint activity. On the other hand, if you want to say, if you want to speak into your computer and have it recognize the words you're saying, you could do that inside your own computer if you had the right software. Therefore, this is your personal, your own activity, and you deserve control over it. And any server that offers to recognize the words for you is doing you an injustice. And of course, that server would know everything you say. It's very, very stupid for people to use voice recognition implement it in somebody else's server. You're basically letting that, whoever runs the server, know everything you do and everything you say. So, for the sake of your freedom, you must say no to SAS. Well, you can see that today's mobile computing is pushing people towards everything that's harmful to them. Non-free software, censorship, spying, SAS. It's bad from beginning to end. But I'm safe. I hope you're safe too. So, the next threat to our freedom in the digital society comes from computerized voting. It's really, really stupid to use computers for voting. You can't trust them. You see, elections are special because you can't check that your vote was counted correctly. You can't check that all the votes were valid votes. So what do we do about this? Traditional voting systems are designed to have people monitoring everything that's going on, with one exception. When the voter marks the paper, nobody's watching. That's secret. But all the rest of the system is being, whoever's doing it is being monitored by other people, and the purpose of this is to prevent fraud. Well, these systems that work on paper, you don't have to be a specially trained professional to understand them. Anybody of ordinary intelligence can understand how the system should normally work and understand what fraud would look like. And so parties can send their representatives to monitor the voting just to make sure the other parties don't commit fraud. But once you have a computer involved, how do you tell if the computer program is committing fraud? Well, you could have some experts study the code in advance. But suppose they do. Suppose they say, this program looks correct to us. So what? How do you know that the program running on election day is the same program that they studied? Maybe somebody installed a corrupt version of the program just before the election and is going to put back the correct version after the election, but the totals will already be wrong. If all you have is a set of totals, this party has this many votes and this party has this many votes, how do you know if that's right? You can't check it. With voting on paper, you can count them again. You can audit the election. We must insist on auditable elections. So people must vote on paper. Now, flaws in the system are not limited to flaws in the software, because the software is part of a larger voting system, and there can be flaws elsewhere. Here's an example from the last U.S. national election. In one place, they were using voting machines, computerized voting machines, where the voter would pick various candidates and say, done, and a few seconds later, it would display another screen saying, you picked these candidates, confirm, yes or no? But by that time, the voter had already left. So there was a dishonest person in the voting place who would go into the voting booth after somebody and would see that screen and push no, and then choose other candidates and put that in. So, well, this is election fraud, and the person was caught. That person was caught. We don't know how many others there were who were not caught. So maybe the software was correct, but the system had a bad flaw. Another flaw, in many cases it's possible to see how the person is voting from outside because the screen emits electromagnetic radiation, which can be picked up elsewhere to reproduce what's on the screen. So if there are not very many people voting there, if you can tell who's voting at any given time, you can see how everybody votes. That's no good. So there are many dangerous problems, many dangers in computerized voting. But it gets even worse. Some governments are proposing internet voting. Now, how nuts can you get? Because of course, there isn't much security on the internet. What if the person votes from a zombie machine that's part of a botnet? The botnet is going to decide that person's vote. The botnet owners could make somebody win the election. Washington, D.C. wanted to have internet voting, so it had a dry run and challenged people to break the security. The election was won by a fictional robot because a team of students succeeded in breaking the security and rigging the election. You can't trust internet voting, and even if the software is completely ironclad and nothing can damage its security, there's another threat. What if your boss says, I want you to vote from the computer in my office while I watch? We can't allow this. There must be no internet voting. The next threat to our freedom comes from the war on sharing. The benefit of digital technology is to make it easier to copy, modify, and transmit information. There are companies that don't want us to get this benefit. The copyright industry. They don't want us to be able to copy and transmit information. And they've been waging war against the users of computers for decades. They started with propaganda. For instance, calling people who share, quote, pirates, unquote. What are they really saying? They're saying that helping other people is the moral equivalent of attacking ships. But that's false, because attacking ships is very bad, but sharing is good. So let's not call them both by the same name. We should refuse to accept the term, quote, pirate, unquote, to mean someone who shares. Therefore, when people ask me what I think of piracy, I say, attacking ships is very bad. Let's send the Navy. And when they ask me what I think of movie piracy, I say, I liked the first Pirates of the Caribbean, because that was movie piracy, yeah. The point is, I look for a funny way to reject the propaganda term, because if you repeat the enemy's propaganda term, you're helping the enemy. Other forms of propaganda they call copying, quote, theft, unquote, which is false. In legal terms, it is not theft. Or they call it, quote, counterfeiting, unquote, which it is not. So you should not repeat their lies. But if all they had done was propaganda, it would not be a war. They have a right to express their views, and I respect that right, even though their views are disgusting. But they went further than just words. They started perverting our technology with digital restrictions mechanisms, converting our digital products from our servants into our oppressors. So we saw this with DVDs. DVDs were designed to have the video encrypted to restrict people in how they watch it or copy it. But people figured out the format and developed a free program. Are you waiting for something? Okay. I mean, if they were waiting for something, I want to know what I need to do. But Thank you. Never enough tea. So, people develop free software, and you could buy a DVD and watch it with free software on your computer. The copyright industry was very unhappy with this. So they started purchasing unjust laws in various countries, starting with the United States. Are you pointing at something are you trying to tell me something? Oh. Anyway, these laws impose official censorship of software. That free software is banned in the United States. And sad to say, in various other countries as well. Countries whose governments are on the side of business against the people. Not democracy, obviously. But that program remains commonly available. So they developed other systems of digital restrictions management for video, which are used in Blu-ray discs. And those are much harder to break. Nobody has ever produced free software capable of reading any Blu-ray disc. And it may never happen. So don't assume that we are always going to be smarter and cleverer than them and that we will always win technically. We must organize politically to prohibit DRM. But it's even worse when they go to streaming, because the problem with streaming is of course it's always used as a non-free program at the client side, and the reason it's non-free is to restrict the user. But it typically has auto upgrade. So, for instance, with Netflix, if somebody figured out how Netflix encrypts the movies, and this is published, Netflix would probably change to a different encryption system the next day. So there's no way we can win technically. We have to make what they're doing illegal. But they didn't, and of course we've also seen DRM in music. For a while there were corrupt discs they looked like compact discs, but they were not written correctly. And the purpose was to try to stop people from using the music in their computers without restriction. But that disappeared several years ago. And it looked like we had defeated DRM in music. But now it's coming back with streaming services, things like Spotify and others, because they send the music encrypted specifically to require a non-free program whose purpose is to restrict the users. So don't use streaming. Don't use these commercial streaming services that are designed to restrict you. It's okay if somebody does streaming in OGG. There's nothing wrong with that. But these commercial streaming services that require a non-free program, there's a reason that program is non-free, because it's malware. And if it were free, the users could fix it. But they don't want the users to fix it, so they make it non-free. If a service requires a non-free program on your side, that's the clue that that service is designed to mistreat you. And we've also seen DRM in books, specifically in ebooks. And the publishers see ebooks as a way to impose their restrictions on how we read and when we read and everything we do with books. That's why I speak of it as the Amazon swindle. That's not its official name, of course, but that's what it does. It's designed to swindle readers out of the traditional freedoms of readers of books. For instance, there's the freedom to acquire a book anonymously by paying cash for it. Amazon doesn't accept cash. Amazon requires users to identify themselves, which you should refuse to do, because this identification enables Amazon to manage a giant database which records each book that each user has read. Such a database threatens human rights. We have to get rid of it. There are countries such as the United Kingdom where merely possessing the wrong book can get you imprisoned. It's an utterly tyrannical government. And then there's the free, but it does more spying than that. With the swindle, Amazon knows what page of what book is being read at each moment. And that's not the only one. The Electronic Frontier Foundation did a study of various different commercial e-readers and found that they all spy on people this way. There were a few little differences, but basically they're all roughly equally bad. Then there's the freedom to give the book to someone else after you read it, which is a kind of expression of friendship. And there's the freedom to lend the book to various people, and the freedom to sell the book to a used bookstore. Amazon abolishes all of these through digital restrictions mechanisms and with an end-user license agreement that says that users can't own books. Amazon's attitude towards private property is more extreme than communism, because Amazon says people can't own e-books. All the e-books belong to Amazon, is what Amazon says. And then there's the freedom to keep a book as long as you wish. Amazon eliminates that with the back door that allows Amazon to remotely delete books. So the official name of this product is Kindle. Kindle means to start a fire. Perhaps that's meant to suggest that the real purpose of this product is to virtually burn people's books. But it's never going to get any of mine. Using these ebooks and ebook readers makes a person antisocial. If somebody is your friend and then starts reading in such a way that he can never lend you a book, that person is no longer your friend. That person has broken off all his friendships with people who read. Well, you don't want this to happen. So warn your friends in advance. Make sure they understand what a mistake it would be so that they don't do it. Be proactive. Don't wait till they make the mistake to tell them it's a mistake. Tell all your friends now. Anyway, DRM and backdoors and surveillance, they make malicious technology, but it didn't stop there, because then they started purchasing the laws to prohibit anything we do to try to break these digital handcuffs. Unjust laws meant to subject us to the power of these publishers. And then the publishers started suing teenagers for hundreds of $1,000s for sharing. Pretty nasty, but it gets nastier, because then they decided to abolish the basic principle of justice: no punishment without a fair trial. In several countries now, including the UK, people can be punished based on the mere accusation of having shared. No need to prove the person really did share. The accusation is enough. Obama wanted to do something like this in the US, but it would be unconstitutional. So he figured out a way to work around that. he brokered a private agreement between the 5 major ISPs and the copyright industry, where the ISPs promise to punish their own customers if the customers are accused of sharing. And this is possible because the customers of the ISPs in the US don't really have any rights. They don't have a right to have service at all. And there's so little competition that most people can't go someplace else. They can't go to another ISP. So, they didn't stop there either. You see, in Japan, it is now a crime punished by 2 years imprisonment to download an unauthorized copy of anything from the net. Now that government is really going wild to attack its own citizens. And if that's not enough, I suppose they'll start executing people for sharing. Because these companies think that everything in the world should be subordinated to their profits. And when they control governments, they'll use the governments against the people. It's no coincidence that they have tried a series of cruel and draconian measures. You see, with digital technology, sharing is easy, and sharing is good, so people share. And only cruel draconian measures can stop them. So of course they try one cruel draconian measure after another. We need to put an end to all of these measures, not just one. We need to legalize sharing. We need to forcibly end the war on sharing and defeat those companies once and for all. Now, sharing has a precise meaning, at least when I use it. It means non-commercial redistribution of exact copies of published works. People must have the freedom to share copies of any published work, which means a change in copyright law. In addition, other changes are needed, because when copyright law gives the public certain rights, which it already does, we must make sure that the publishers can't remove those rights, not through technical measures, so we have to prohibit DRM, and not through contracts, so we have to prohibit the end-user license agreements. We have to say to the publishers, copyright law is what you've got. If that gives people certain rights, they have those rights, and you're not allowed to do anything to take those rights away. Other changes are needed. We should make copyright last a shorter period of time. I propose 10 years. We need to establish worldwide the idea of fair use as it exists in the US. And we need to legalize remix. Remix means you take pieces out of various works and you put them together to make a work that's fundamentally different. Remix is not the same thing as making a modified version of a work, because remix makes a totally different work. And if the purpose of copyright is to encourage people to make new works, copyright should encourage remix. So, this is what we have to do. But the companies say that the reason they want ever more power over us is for the sake of the artists. And these companies pretend that they are supporting artists, which is more false than true. They do support the stars. They're very nice to the stars because the stars have clout. Aside from the stars, these companies treat the artists like dirt, and at the same time they demand power over us for the same, in the name of the artists that they are treating like dirt. So their arguments are bogus. But there is a little bit of validity in them. If we want arts, we have to support artists somehow. But that doesn't mean we have to allow these companies to oppress us. There are other ways to support artists, ways that can work better, because they'll be focused on supporting artists instead of supporting businesses. And we can design them so that they are compatible with sharing. I have two proposals. One is the government collects some money to distribute to artists. It can get this money out of the general budget. It can use taxing internet connections. There are various ways it can get this money. It doesn't matter how, because it won't be so much money. It'll be less than we're spending now. The crucial thing is, how do you distribute the money? The existing system is supposed to give money to artists based on their popularity. Just to be conservative, let's keep that. So the government will distribute the money among artists based on their popularity, which has to be measured somehow. So you can do it by polling people, asking people, would you please hook up your computer so that it will record what works you watch, and then anonymously you can send that in, and you can refuse if you want. Or it could be done by counting how often works are shared in peer-to-peer networks, because that's publicly visible anyway. Once you get a popularity figure for each artist, then what? The obvious idea is give each artist money in proportion to her popularity. But this gives bad results. With linear proportion, if A is twice as popular as B, A will get twice as much money as B. If A is a star and B is a fairly successful, capable, appreciated artist, A might be 1,000 times as popular as B. So A would get 1,000 times as much money as B, which means in order to give B enough money that B doesn't need a day job, we have to make A tremendously rich, which means most of the money would go to a few stars, and it would not do much good for the arts. It wouldn't be going to the place where it's really needed. So I propose, let's take the cube root of the popularity figure of each artist and give the money in proportion to the cube roots. The cube root function looks like this. It rises fast and then more and more slowly. The cube root of 1,000 is 10. If star A is 1,000 times as popular as capable, appreciated artist B, with the cube root, A will get 10 times as much money as B. Not 1,000 times, just 10 times. So the effect of the cube root is to transfer most of the money from the stars to the mid-range popularity artists who could really use more help. The artists we're helping them will really support the arts in an effective way. Now, each star will still get more than a non-star because the cube root function keeps rising. It never goes down. But it doesn't rise so fast, not like linear proportion, which is like this. So the cube root focuses the money where it does good. This system will be more efficient at supporting the arts than the existing system. First, because it doesn't give so much money to the stars, and second, because it's not giving money to the businesses. So we'll support the arts better with less of our money. And this is why we don't have to care really how the government gets the money, because we'll be saving money anyway. We'll be supporting the arts with less money than we're spending now. But I have another proposal, voluntary payments. Let's take each player and give it a button you can use to anonymously send a small sum of money to the artists. How much? Well, there should be an optimal amount. If it's too small, then even if everybody pushes the money, the artist won't get very much. If it's too big, lots of people won't want to send it. They'll think, oh, I don't want to give that much. So there should be some amount which maximizes the total amount people send per unit time. I would guess it might be something like 10 yuan. You know, it's pretty small, but not microscopic. It's not a micropayment. It's enough that if a lot of people send it, it will add up to something, but it's small enough that you wouldn't hesitate. Some economist could figure out what the optimal amount would be. I'm no economist. I can't do it. And you can push the button and send it or not. It's up to you. If you don't send the money, nobody will punish you. If you do send it, you'll feel good. And this is why people will give. But not everybody. Poor people won't give. Poor people can't afford it, and they won't, which is good. Because there are plenty of non-poor people who will be happy to give money to artists. If we make it easy, why didn't you send 10 yuan to the artist who made the last work you appreciated? Because it's hard to do it. So I'm saying let's set up a system that makes it easy to anonymously send this money. Now, in fact, artists are already supported through voluntary payments. Many artists have a website that asks people to give money. It's not anonymous. That's unfortunate. But they can give money, and typically they're asking for much larger amounts of money. And they might say, well, if you give $50, I'll send you this nice thing that is a token of my appreciation. If you send $500, I'll have dinner with you. Various levels. And that works to some extent, and it's good. But if we allow people to send smaller amounts of money, more people will send them. Crowdfunding is also working pretty well. Even pay if you wish is working pretty well. A year and a half ago, a number of well-known science fiction writers released the Humble ebook bundle. No DRM, no end-user license agreement, and pay if you wish. They got $1 million in a month, which they told me was equivalent to being on the New York Times bestseller list. So, in fact, artists can make money with voluntary payments. But I'm suggesting we make it easy for everyone to do that. These two methods of supporting artists will convince all artists to say, please share my work. Show it to other people. Get more people to like it. Because their interests will be not just their emotional interest. Their emotional interest will be aligned with their financial interest. They want more people to appreciate their work. And sharing their work will, if you share their work, you'll be helping them, and they'll know it. Now, I don't propose to get rid of the ways that artists make money now, such as selling copies of things, or making things on commission, or charging for admission to a performance. I don't see any harm in those practices, and I don't propose to do anything to them. These are additional ways for artists to get support. The last threat to our freedom in the digital society is the fact that we don't have the right to do anything in the internet. In order to do anything in the internet, you need the cooperation of companies. You can't do it on your own. And those companies don't have to cooperate with you. They can cut you off if they don't like what you're doing. For instance, if you have some opinion to express, you can write it on a sign. You can make handouts. And then you go in the street carrying the sign and give out the handouts. This is your right to do, and you don't need to get any company to help you. But if you want to do the same thing in the internet, you need the cooperation of an ISP, a domain name registrar, and a hosting company. And they can cut off their service and cut you off from doing things in the digital world. If you want to collect money for your cause, on the street you can just carry a box and invite people to put cash anonymously into this box. But if you want to do this if you want to collect money from supporters in the internet, well, until recently you needed the support of a payment company, and the payment companies can refuse to serve you. Remember I said that Obama was able to arrange the unjust deal between American ISPs and the copyright industry because the customers of the ISPs don't have rights. The ISPs are allowed to arbitrarily punish their customers. So the danger of this was made clear when the U.S. government tried to kick WikiLeaks off the internet. Now, it didn't do this by prosecuting WikiLeaks because there was nothing to prosecute it for. There were no grounds for prosecution. So the U.S. government tried to do this extrajudicially by intimidating the companies that provided services to WikiLeaks. First, WikiLeaks had rented an Amazon virtual server. Now, you shouldn't buy anything from Amazon. Look at stallman.org/amazon.html for a long list of reasons. Nasty things that Amazon does to its workers, to publishers, to authors, to readers, to the National Treasury. You name it, Amazon mistreats it. But I just figured I should mention that since I'm mentioning Amazon. WikiLeaks had rented an Amazon virtual server and was using that to distribute the leaked material. So a U.S. official contacted Amazon and made some threats, and Amazon then decided that WikiLeaks was violating the terms of service. Now, this is a decision in which Amazon is the prosecutor, judge, and executioner. So Amazon canceled, shut down WikiLeaks' server. Then the U.S. attacked various domain name registrars and got some of WikiLeaks' domain names canceled, but fortunately not all of them, because some were outside the power of the U.S. And then the U.S. attacked the payment companies, and Visa and MasterCard and PayPal and Google and the Bank of America and more all said that they would not send any money to WikiLeaks. Then a company in Iceland started offering to collect money for WikiLeaks, and Visa and MasterCard cut off that company too. And then they ran into a problem. You see, European Union law says that because Visa and MasterCard have a large fraction of the market, they're not allowed to arbitrarily stop serving anyone. So that company sued them and won and forced them to resume service. This is the kind of rights this is what it means to have rights to do things in the internet. We must establish rights like that for all the usual services that people use in the internet. It should be the same as renting an apartment. In the U.S., when you rent an apartment, normally you sign a contract, and there are laws about those contracts which say once you've rented this, the landlord can't kick you out. The only thing the landlord can do is go to court and try to present arguments why you should be evicted. So if you didn't pay your rent, the landlord can't just say you have to leave. The landlord has to go to court and show you didn't pay your rent, and then the court may say you have to leave. With all these various kinds of internet services, as long as you keep paying your bill and you obey certain very simple rules about not damaging the service itself, the service should not be allowed to cut you off. That's what it means to have the right to do things in the internet. So, for more information about free software, generally look at gnu.org. There is also fsf.org, the site of the Free Software Foundation, where you can find resources for using and developing and promoting free software. You can find our political pressure campaigns. For instance, we have a campaign aimed at the World Wide Web Consortium, which is considering a proposal from companies like Netflix to officially endorse DRM as part of the HTML specification. Now, I'm not so naive as to believe that without help from the W3C, DRM will be impossible. Netflix is already using DRM, but we have a long-term fight to eliminate DRM. And if the W3C gives its blessing to DRM, that will be a terrible defeat. So please sign our campaign aimed at the World Wide Web Consortium saying, don't approve of DRM. You can do this through fsf.org. You can also become a member of the FSF through fsf.org. Or you can do that here. If you want to pay your dues in cash, you could pay them to me and fill out a card, and you'll become a member. If you buy things outside, you're supporting the Free Software Foundation, so please do that. And, oh, by the way, did that bag get brought? Could you give it to me right now? Because I want to show you one thing that should be for sale. Anyway, this is an adorable GNU that needs a home. I have a problem, though. I should have had 2 of them, and I only have 1. And I have 2 speeches to give. The next one is going to be in Kaohsiung. So I'm trying to think, because I want to auction one here, and I want to auction one there, but I've only got 1. So my idea is to auction one here, but we'll send it to you after I sign it. So here they are. So these are 50
yuan?
Yeah.
Okay.
So please take them out.
50 yuan.
Those are metallic stickers that say gnu+linux inside. There are also buttons and pins, and there's a key ring, which are all for sale. So if you could take it out to them and teach them what to do. So this is the adorable GNU. So my idea is to auction it, but I won't be able to give you this one because I have to save this one for Kaohsiung. So when whoever wins the auction, I will take down from you how I should sign it, and when I get my hands on one, I'll sign it and we'll ship it to you. So I wish I could give it to you today, but I can't. Nonetheless, I'm going to try to auction it, and if you're the buyer, I can sign the card for you, and I will sign the card before we ship it. If you have a penguin at home, you need a GNU for your penguin. Because we all know that a penguin can hardly function without a GNU. We can accept payment in cash or with a credit card if it can make international purchases by phone. We can also accept payment in Bitcoin if you've got the ability to make the payment in front of me right now. And when you bid, please wave your arm and shout the amount so I can hear you, because I have hearing problems. And I'm going to have to start with a little more than the usual price to make sure we can cover the cost of shipping it to you. So I'll start with 1,000 yuan, which is just a little more than the usual price. So do I get 1,000 for this adorable GNU? How much? Oh, I've got 1,100. Do I get 1,200? Do I get 1,200 for this adorable GNU that needs a home? How much? I've got 5,000. Wow. I've got 5,000. Do I get 5,500? Look, it's an auction. Whatever price I'm offered, I have to ask for more. Do I get 5,500 for this adorable GNU that needs a home? Do I get 5,500 to the Free Software Foundation to Defend Freedom? How much? I've got 6,000. Do I get 6,500? Do I get 6,500 for this adorable GNU that needs a home to the Free Software Foundation to Defend Freedom? Do I get 6,500? Last chance to bid 6,500 or more. Last chance. Go. How much?
6,500.
I've got 6,500. Do I get 7,000? Do I get 7,000 for this adorable GNU? 7,000 to the Free Software Foundation to Defend Freedom? Last chance. How much? 10,000. Wow. I've got 10,000. Do I get 11,000? What? What? Yeah, this is 7,000. This is Taiwanese currency, not dollars. I mean, I wouldn't expect that much. I would, if it were dollars, I would have started with 30 or so, you know. So I've got 10,000. Do I get 11,000 for this adorable GNU? 11,000 to the Free Software Foundation to Defend Freedom? Last chance to bid 11,000 or more. Going. Gone for 10,000. So, which method of payment would you like to use? We can, but you'll need to be able to do the payment in front of me. Because otherwise, how would I know? On the other hand, you could use a credit card also, you know. It's going to take time for me to arrange to sign one. We could ship it tomorrow if I didn't have to sign it. But of course, I'm going to sign it, and that means I need to have another GNU in my hand so I can ship it, and that will take some time. It'll take a few weeks, I'm afraid. So we can do a payment whichever way you like, and we can do it later. So now it's time for questions. Now, I am hard of hearing. I am hard of hearing, so when you speak to me, please speak loud and clearly and slowly. Pronounce each consonant carefully so I can tell what the word is. So, and you can speak either English or Chinese or French or Spanish if you prefer. Yeah. But keep the microphone here, and people who want to ask a question should come here and make a queue. That's a much better way than usual. So those of you who have questions, please come here and queue up to ask. This system is more efficient than transporting the microphone around the room, and it's also more fair because when you get in the queue, you have your place in the queue, and you know you will get to ask when you reach the front. So there are no questions. Wow, that means I don't have much more work to do. Great.
I'll ask the question in Chinese. Would that be all right?
Okay, is the translator translating? Can I hear you, translator? Okay.
OK， 好，我用中文问哦，就说刚才那个 Richard Stallman 有提到说，像一些 streaming 的服务很不好。那我想请教的问题是说，那有好的 streaming 服务吗？就是有没有可能 streaming 的服务它是好的？有没有好的方式可以来做 streaming 的服务？这是我的问题。
No, none of the commercial streaming services are acceptable. Their purpose is to restrict you. They all treat you with contempt.
OK， 所以so there's no commercial streaming that's
no.
Basically good.
Streaming is designed to mistreat people by denying people possession of copies. You should reject the idea of that. Make sure you have your own copy.
Okay. But what about if people want convenience of being able to listen to things they want on any device?
Obviously, anyone who prefers convenience to freedom is a fool.
Okay.
I'm not going to give people advice on how to be fools.
Okay, all right. Thank you. 谢谢。
Mr. Stallman, thank you for coming to Taiwan. There's no, my question, there's no such a thing as a free lunch. So this speech is offered to audience because the organizers takes care of everything. So my question is,
but wait a second, you're changing the subject. When I say free, I mean 自由. I don't mean 免费. That's a different issue.
Oh, really?
I'm not saying anything is supposed to be 免费.
Okay, so who pays?
I don't object if you charge somebody money to do something for that somebody.
Oh, really? Okay.
I don't object to that at all. For instance, in the 1980s, first I sold copies of free software. The software was 自由. When you got a copy that you paid for, that is, I sold copies on magnetic tapes. I said, send me $150 and I'll mail you a magnetic tape with this software. Now, you received the program as free software. It respected your freedom, but you paid me to send it to you. You bought the copy from me. I put the same program on an FTP server, and other people could download it that way gratis. They received the same source code under the same license. It was a precursor of the GNU General Public License. It was the GNU Emacs General Public License. The free software issue is not about money. It's not about whether people pay. It's about respect for people's freedom. If a program is non-free, it attacks your freedom, and if you're wise, you will reject it even if it's gratis. Remember, there are user subjugating non-free programs that are gratis, like Flash Player. I explained that Flash Player has a digital restrictions mechanism, and it's surveils the user. It's proprietary malware, but it's available gratis.
In this case, I get your point about piracy and sharing movies, because the only difference is about money and about payment. So can you clarify what's the difference between free beer, free lunch, and free software?
Well, when I say free software, I mean 自由. So I say think of free speech, not free beer. And I don't mean free lunch either. You know, we sometimes raise money to pay people to write free software. And that's a fine thing to do. Because if we raise money and we pay people, we can convince them to write more free software, which is good. I'm not saying that it's wrong for you to get paid to write software. But in order for that to be ethical, the software has to be free. That is, it must be freedom respecting. Now, there are lots of companies that develop free software, and they're paid to do so. Because some user needs a program to do a certain thing and is willing to pay. Well, these companies are ethical, so they deliver they accept the contract, they develop the program, they deliver it to the client, and they get paid. But the thing that makes them ethical is they respect the client's freedom. They deliver this program as free software. Now, they still get paid, and the clients still pay, because nobody's going to write that software for them unless they pay. It can be done ethically, or it can be done unethically, delivering non-free software.
One more question. You refuse to disclose your personal information on the internet, but you have your friend to pay online for you.
Well, remember, these are people who are in the habit of buying things online. I wouldn't say to anybody, please start revealing information about yourself online to do something for me. No, if a person also joins me in refusing, I say, good on you. But the people I ask to do me this favor, they're disclosing information about themselves all the time. They're not making things any worse for themselves by doing me this favor.
So you don't oppose disclosing personal information in that case?
I do, but the point is those people are willing to do it. And they're doing it for themselves. Now, I think we need to have a service where you can buy a physical thing and pay anonymously and collect it anonymously. And here's how it could work. A store could have this service. They will order something on the internet, you pay them in cash, and they give you a code, and when the thing comes in, you come back and pick it up. They don't have to know who you are because you're paying them in cash. And if you don't come back and pick it up, eventually they'll send it back, and they'll still have the cash you paid them. So they can't really lose much.
I'd like to ask you, it's because Facebook is so big, well, let's just think of it like the waterworks or a public utility, so I don't have to...
It's not. It's not.
Oh.
Well, first of all, it's not a public utility. It's trying to make money, and there's no regulation limiting how much money it can make. Second, its business is mistreating people. So if you don't want to be mistreated on the internet, don't be a used of Facebook.
Hello, and thanks for your speech. And I have two questions. The first one is how to build an environment or community to support the pursuing of being free and independent.
Well, you have to organize politically, which means looking for people who support the cause and then thinking, how are we going to work together to teach more people about this issue, and how are we going to act politically? Now, there's no recipe for that. I don't know a recipe for how you win a political battle to change laws and so on, but sometimes people do.
So if someone who wants to pursuing this freedom, he must change how he lives.
Yes. For instance, if your life includes being used by Facebook, Facebook is mistreating you. You have to stop. If your life involves using Apple equipment, well, if you don't want Apple to mistreat you, to have power over you, you got to change. You got to replace the non-free software. Now, on a Macintosh, it is possible to install the gnu+linux system.
So there are maybe a heavy price or cost.
Freedom sometimes requires a sacrifice. That's the nature of life.
Okay. And the second question is about the DRM. I know sometimes DRM is more powerful than local laws. So what can we do about this?
Well, first of all, DRM should be illegal. Well, that's what we really want. But actually, first of all, you should just reject the products that have DRM. I have no products with DRM.
But what if it's legal in US, but it's not legal in Taiwan, but we cannot do anything about it because...
Well, it depends. If enough countries, which are a big enough market, start prohibiting DRM, publishers will decide to sell without DRM in order to reach that market. But the first step is personally reject products with DRM.
Okay, thank you. So this fight is harder than I thought.
It is. We've been fighting for a long time.
Thank you.
I didn't say that victory was going to be easy.
Hi, Dr. Stallman. I have one question, and I'm going to ask the other question for this gentleman, because he asked me to. If the free software, the term free, is misleading, do you consider to maybe freedom software or...
Well, there's a problem with that particular term, which is there's a company with that name, or there was.
Freedom.
We sometimes say libre software,
Yes.
borrowing a French or Spanish word, because in those languages, that word means specifically free as in freedom, and there's a different word for zero price.
As in Chinese, you pointed out, 自由软体
Yeah.
and 免费软体 there.
Yeah, exactly. So we use other languages. That's a way to solve this problem. But the word libre is starting to be used enough that people are starting to recognize it.
And his question is, he wants to know your opinion about peer-to-peer technology.
It's good. In fact, in general, we should try to replace servers with peer-to-peer systems, because a server is a centralized thing and gives some sort of, is likely to give some sort of power to whoever owns the server. And it's also a centralized place for surveillance. So it's, in general, better to design systems to work peer-to-peer and avoid any centralized location.
And the peer-to-peer technology, the future, how you think?
I do not see the future, because it depends on all of you.
Okay, ask one more. Do you like Taiwan? And what do you think about the software environment in Taiwan?
I don't know anything about the software environment in Taiwan. I haven't paid attention to that.
Okay.
There is some wonderful food.
Please consider
There are some strange religious customs. For instance, I stayed in somebody's house in Taipei, and they were burning incense as an offering to the mosquito god.
to kill them.
Well, I think it was to beg the mosquito god to send the mosquitoes away. And today, we went to Sun Moon Lake and we tried to get some president fish, but they gave us another fish instead, which is the vice president fish.
What's your next time to Taiwan?
I don't know.
Please come.
Hello. I have two questions. First,台湾高中还有那个台湾考术士的使用的程式员都是 VB， 我个人认为这是非常不好的一个现象。那你认为说，我们国家应该要使用推广另外一套怎么样的政策？
Well, first of all educational activities ethically must teach only non-free software. I explained why. That's written down in gnu.org/education/edu-schools.html. So you can show people copies of that. Second, governments should adopt various policies to move society towards free software. Look at gnu.org/philosophy/governmentfreesoftware.html for these policies. Now, to convince the government to adopt these policies, people have to organize and campaign politically. This is not a trivial thing. What can I say? I wish I could make it trivial. In a couple of countries, it was trivial. People spoke to the president, and the president decided, yes, this is what we should do, and made this decision. But you can't expect things to be so easy all the time. So you're going to have to organize and campaign. There is work for you to do for the sake of freedom in this country.
Okay. The second question is, 你推动自由软体运动以来，你觉得你有没有搞砸过，或者是做错一些事情？
I'm sure I have, but I don't like to talk about my mistakes.
Okay, thank you.
Hi. I have two questions about the GPL. So there's a lot of licenses, either OSI or FSF approved licenses, but they kind of fragment what really should be a big global sort of unified community.
Yeah.
And now the GPL itself has 3 versions. I guess ideally all projects using GPL should go to the latest versions, but some big projects don't.
And
which,
your point is?
Yeah, so this leads to further fragmentation.
And your question is?
I'm just curious what you think about that. If that does GPL versions has that brought too much complexity or?
No, the reason for making a new version of the GNU General Public License is because there's a problem with the old one and we need to fix it. It's that simple. We have to be able to make new versions because nothing is perfect. And I think it's a sad mistake on the part of developers not to advance to the latest GNU GPL. It's a sad mistake on the part of developers if they use an incompatible license. But I can't tell them what to do. So if you don't like the fragmentation that causes, complain to them. fundamentally, there are two kinds of free software licenses. There are the copyleft licenses, which say when you redistribute this, you must pass the freedom on to the next person. So the code must stay free in all of its forms. And then there are the pushover licenses, which permit the use of that code in non-free software. Well, in most cases, it's a mistake, in my view, to use a pushover license. But that's because I'm a free software activist, and I'm thinking in terms of how do we give everyone freedom. The people who use pushover licenses typically have a different political view. They don't consider freedom for all users as the goal. Well, at least if their programs are free software, we can use them and have freedom, so they are contributing something. And even though I think they could contribute better, it's better that they're doing this than that if they did nothing at all or made it proprietary. So at least we have cooperation. What's most unfortunate is when they use licenses that are incompatible with the GNU GPL. And I hope people will not do that. Now, we made a lot of improvements between GPL version 2 and GPL version 3. GPL version 2 was designed with U.S. lawyers, based on U.S. law only. And GPL version 3 was designed consulting lawyers from many countries. It's a much better license. It will give you more uniform results around the world. It deals with the danger of computational idea patents much better. And it also prevents the practice we call TiVoization, where a computer is designed as a tyrant, where it won't let users run a modified executable. Now, ironically, this is exactly why some projects don't use GPL version 3. For instance, Torvalds decided to keep Linux on GPL version 2 specifically to permit it to be used in tyrant devices where the executable is not free software. Now, why would he do this? Because freedom is not his goal. Well, I really wish he would change his mind, but I can't tell him what to do.
Yeah, right. My other question was, so especially in certain software communities, sort of the non-copyleft licenses have become very popular, sort of the MIT BSD licenses.
Well, actually, that's mistaken to use those terms. Never use those terms. There are two different BSD licenses, and one of them is compatible with the GPL and the other is not. So please don't talk about BSD licenses. Now, the term MIT license is also ambiguous. There are two different licenses they mean. But yes, these are pushover licenses, and I think those people are making a sad mistake.
Yeah, so my actual question was, so what you do often see is that people license libraries, both GPL and for commercial usage, sort of dual licensing.
Dual licensing is something else.
Yeah.
Dual licensing is when they release the same code with two licenses and say, take your pick.
Yeah, exactly.
What you're talking about, no, what you're talking about is something else, which is selling exceptions. It's not the case that they release it under a commercial license. No, what they do is they have a commercial practice where they sell one particular client permission to use the code in other ways. Now, this may be bad or not, depending on details. Look at gnu.org/philosophy/sellingexceptions.html for the full analysis of these different practices.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much.
你好，我想问，就是请问 Richard Stallman 先生，你支持就网络实名制吗？那我先说， 我支持网络实名制，原因是因为我认为言论自由的公共目的是为了要促进政治讨论。那在政府不用这些政治言论去压迫个人，就是在其他的法规下都规范很完全的情况底下，就是叫实名制是让所有人负起自己的言论责任，而不是散播不实言论，并且借机进行网络霸凌。那请问因为在自由软体的世界里面，不断的在开发很多的反追踪软体，并且在其中不免会夹带很多实名制是迫害言论自由的这种说法。那想请那个 Richard Stallman 的先生，你的意见是什么？
Well, I'm sure the government of China agrees with you. The government of China doesn't want people spreading rumors on the internet and punishes people very harshly if they're accused of spreading rumors on the internet. And of course, anything that the government doesn't like is called a rumor, even if it's true. You will find that this is a measure of repression. I condemn the communication systems that require people's real names, and I urge people to refuse to use them. Now, this includes Facebook and Google+. Now, I am in a position where I can state my views proudly with my name on them, because I don't have a job. I don't have an employer who I have to be afraid would fire me. I already state lots of controversial views, and if people don't like it, I say to them, tough. But not everybody can do this. People who have a job are often terrified that they will be fired and their lives will be ruined. So they don't dare do anything attributable to their name that their employer wouldn't approve of. So, and then this is not to mention the many governments that punish people for saying certain opinions. Now, whistleblowers in the US don't dare admit who they are. They have to conceal their identities, and they may need to work very hard to do so. And yet they're giving us communications that are tremendously important for democracy.
我想请问 Richard Stallman 一个问题是，现在很多智慧型手机很普及，大家都会习惯用一些 cloud service， 像是Evernote、Dropbox、Google Drive， 那也给生活带来很多的便利。那我想先确认一下，像这样子的行为，是不是就是一种在放弃自己自由的权利的一种行为？
Yes, it is. You're a fool to use those systems. In fact, I had the idea a couple of days ago to refer to them as clod computing. A clod is somebody who is stupid. But I don't use the term cloud in general because it means too many different things. And these different things raise different issues. But you're talking about a specific thing which involves storing your data in a company's servers, which is basically handing over all your data to Big Brother. You can't get stupider than that on the internet.
我们都知道维护自由需要牺牲一些便利，但是 它确实是蛮方便的。那请问还没有一些好的建议可以做到类似的事情？
Well, of course you have the option of keeping your data in your own computer, in your own disk drive. That's what I do. Now, you can use a remote backup service, and that's safe, provided you put all your files into an archive, and then you encrypt the archive on your own computer with free software, and then you can upload that archive to a remote service, and they can't figure out anything. Even the file names are hidden because they're inside the archive, and the archive is encrypted as a whole. So that way it's actually safe, and that's a reasonable kind of service to use. But you've got to be using it with only free software on your end. And the encryption and decryption have to be done in your machine with your free software. If the service takes charge of doing the encryption or decryption, you can't trust it. That means it's untrustworthy. The encryption and decryption, in order to be trustworthy, must have nothing to do with the service. Now, when I contrast what people say, oh, but how could I accept this inconvenience for the sake of my freedom, with people in the past who risked their lives for freedom, I think that we are mostly showing up pretty bad compared with those people in the past.
谢谢。
Good afternoon, Mr. Stallman. 我想问的是，就是最近有一些，就是我是不知道您的国家有没有，可是近几年台湾都会有一些，就是像是就是网军的东西，那他就会在他可能属于某个政治人物、某个政党，然后或者是甚至是可能是某个公司，或者就根本就是政府的。那他就会在网络上面去进行一些，就是发表一些言论，那可能就是对于那个就是政府有利，可是又去诋毁那个他们反对者的一些言论，或者甚至有私人公司他们去假装产品使用者来那个，就是来那个说，就是说他们的产品很好这样子，那就是不知道您对这样的想法。
I agree that's a problem, but I don't believe we can prevent it by making individuals give their real names. Because the people who are being, say, paid to give these comments, they could be paid to post these comments under their real names, and they'd still do it. So I don't have a solution for this except organizing. I agree it's not a very good solution, but I don't see any better one.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, hello, good afternoon. I was born and I might speak Chinese. 我在1984年生，那这一年可能你会觉得蛮熟悉的，因为那一年正好是那个 gnu+ 的作业系统诞生的年。对，那我今年已经30岁了。那我是一个 gnu+ 的测试者，我不会说是个使用者，因为它似乎还没有到一个真的能够到商业运转，或者是。
I have to point out, the GNU herd is the kernel we started developing in 1990. So this is one component of the GNU operating system, and it's one that is not generally in use because, as you say, it doesn't work as well as Linux does. So we mostly use Linux. But the GNU project is what I started. The development of the GNU operating system as a whole is what I began in 1984.
Okay, so我很有兴趣想要了解，就是在今天还有之后，对于这个 GNU herd 本身的计划，是不是有什么计划 就是未来的一些计划或者一些打算。那它究竟是要继续还是？
Volunteers are working on the GNU herd. It's not a high priority project because it would be a replacement for the free software in Linux. Well, we don't need to replace the free software in Linux. I would be pleased to see a GNU program become the kernel everyone likes, but it's not something we need desperately. On the other hand, there are projects we need desperately. Linux, as it is today, contains firmware programs that are not free. And parts of it depend on other firmware programs that are not free. Well, those are an injustice. Those are the thing we need to replace. But these are two separate and independent projects. To develop the herd to replace the free code in Linux is one project, and then replacing each of these firmware blobs is another project, and these projects are independent. The ones that we need are replacing the firmware blobs. So that's the thing that we're urging people to please work on. The herd, some volunteers continue working on it, but it's not necessary.
OK， 所以对，因为以前我们得到的资讯是 ，the GNU herd 是 the one GNU operating system, and it's not anymore, right?
No, that's not true. That was never true.
OK.
That's a misunderstanding. An operating system contains many things that do many jobs. Many programs are components of the operating system. And that's what we set out to develop, an entire system. The GNU herd is one component of the system.
Okay.
We started it in 1990 because a kernel was necessary, and there was no free kernel, and it didn't look like there would ever be one unless we wrote one, so we hired somebody to write one. But it's one component of the GNU system. And that job was filled by Linux.
Okay.
So once Linux became free software, well, initially it wasn't very good, but people made it better. So now we have a kernel. We take Linux and we delete the non-free stuff, and that produces a free kernel, which we call Linux Libre. And that's our free kernel.
Okay.
Now, to replace that with the GNU herd, well, if the GNU herd started being technically better, then people would switch to it, and I would be pleased. But we don't need that. We do need to replace the non-free firmware programs and other non-free programs with free software. This is why we are not giving priority to the GNU herd.
好，那应该是我误会了。对，那我花了非常多年的时间，一直在尝试说，要最 pure 的 GNU 的东西。那看来我们现在可以把一些精力转到其他的 project 上面了。Yeah，OK， 那还有下一个问题是，您刚才有提到说，其实在教育方面是非常重要的。对，那如果说，因为我自己现在是在大学里面教free software 相关的课程。对，那我想问说，如果说我们在教这类课程的话，是不是有什么资源，也许FSF 乐意去协助或提供之类的？
Well, the educational resources we know of can be found in gnu.org/education.
Okay.
Next question.
Could you tell something about your opinion on trademark law?
On what?
Trademark law. Trademark law is
Trademark law is basically okay.
Firefox and Ice Whistle.
Okay, listen. I don't object to trademark law as such. Now, it's okay to use trademarks on free software, but there are certain rules you have to follow to make it ethical. Remember, free software means people are free to make exact copies and redistribute them. And this means commercially or non-commercially. So if people are not allowed to do that, then the program's not free. Now, it doesn't matter what prohibits people from doing that. If they're not allowed to do that, the program is not free. With Microsoft Windows, the thing that stops them from doing that is a contract. So it's not free. In the case of Firefox, what stops people from doing that is a restriction on the use of the trademark. With Firefox, they say you're not allowed to redistribute even exact copies. So in order to have something that's free, you have to change the name. This is why Debian has something called Iceweasel. It's the same code. All they do is they change the name and the logo, because those are the trademarks of the Mozilla Foundation, and the Mozilla Foundation has restricted them such that the program is non-free if it has that name. On the other hand, there's another way of using trademarks which is okay, which is if there's a trademark in the program and people are allowed to redistribute it without change, but if they change the program, they have to remove the trademark. This is okay, because once you start changing the program and doing work on it, it's okay to make rules about how to package your modified version. So to say to people, if you want to just redistribute it without change, you have to change it, that's no good. But to say to people, once you start changing it, you have to change the name also, that's okay.
Okay, thank you.
Now, the reason for this is changing the program means you have to work and you have to think about it.
Yeah.
But you don't need to think about anything just to make an exact copy and redistribute that. If you put this requirement of packaging on something that on an act that requires understanding, like changing the program, it's acceptable there. But to put this requirement of changing the name on people who are just planning to copy it, that is unacceptable. It's putting a big burden on what should be extremely easy. If you put the same burden on something that's harder, it's okay, because it starts out being hard.
Okay, so next question.
I can't understand you at all. Did you say something?
No.
Because people talking to me quietly works. It doesn't work. I don't know.
Sorry. I'm nervous. Next question.
Yeah.
Oh, hello. And I want to ask a question that because most of us are not code professional, so how can we make more people to concern about this issue?
Well, you've heard the arguments I use. I have an article, a fairly new article, which explains these issues, which is gnu.org/philosophy/free software even more important.html. Our ethical issues make sense to non-programmers. We have convinced non-programmers that they have to reject non-free software because their freedom is at stake. The practical issues presented by open source supporters often are of no interest to anybody but a programmer. If you say, this way people will improve the code quality, only programmers are likely to care. But when we show people that they're going to be mistreated and oppressed through non-free software, that they can understand.
But we can't stop people by using, because the first time we use computer source, we often use like Windows or something else. Yeah.
Yes, it's sad.
So how can we 宣传 sorry how can we make this more people know about
You
this?
see what I do. You
Just
can try it the same way or try it a different way.
take something for example, telling others.
I don't. Yeah, give a speech. Talk to your friends. Even if you get into a discussion and other people are talking about open source, and you say 自由人权, you're going to be helping to spread the idea that this is about freedom.
But if they think the convenience is more
Look,
bigger
you
than
can't convince everybody, so don't worry about it.
so if we can't convince everyone, we just do what we do, what we can
You
do.
do what you can.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
I just love those Google Maps. Not OpenStreetMap, I can't even find my grandma's house. What do you think, Mom?
Well, the sad thing is that both Google Maps and OpenStreetMap have a serious problem, that they don't work without running non-free JavaScript code. So if you want freedom, you can't use either of them now. But there is a free program that can do OpenStreetMap computing and display locally. And now, if some street data is not present in OpenStreetMap, there's a thing you can do about that.
所以还有其他问题吗？
I'm done. I'm done. There's too much. It's too late. It's time for me to go.
好，那我们再用热烈掌声谢谢 Richard M. Stallman RMS， 谢谢。Thank you very much for the long talk。那个，我想我们刚刚在那个 Richard 的 speech 里面，大家都看得出来，就是说，他这一生就是过去30年来，还有到这一生，都一直在奉献在自由这件事情。那他也一直强调，就是说，自由跟便利有时候是冲突的。那这是一个价值上的选择啊，但是自由长期来说对整个社会或者对我们人类都是很好的事。那大家应该也看得出来，能够写作业系统 kernel 的，就应该说作业系统的人，他的功力是非常高啊。其实30年前，如果 Richard Stallman 愿意选择的话，他的路可能是就是说会跟今天的 Bill Gates 或者是苹果的 Jobs 是就是说可以有一样的这种成就，就是在商业上，但他选择的是另外一条路。OK， 那他其实我觉得还是一个很富有的人。那可能造福了，可能也是就是几亿人 ，billions of people。那只不过是他的财富不是在这个必然是钱上，而是他所影响到的人们身上。哦，那我们就再一次谢谢 Richard Stallman。Thank you。好，那个等一下是有那个 so book signing afterwards。OK，so 那个。等一下是有签书，就是那个 RMS 会到这个在外面，那可能请大家有购买他的书要来签书了，就到外面去排队，这样好。那谢谢大家。那有免费的 sticker 也可以拿，这个是这个就是可以购买 FSF 的纪念品跟索取那个免费的 sticker， 可以贴在那个笔电上面。好，谢谢大家今天过来，谢谢。